So, hi everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker for today, Dr. Taniesha Burke. Dr. Taniesha Burke is a cross-cultural developmental psychology researcher. She holds a PhD in family relations and human development from the University of Guelph, Canada. Dr. Burke's research focuses on child development and parent-child relationships. Her research promotes the strength and resilience of the family, and she has a wealth of teaching experience as well. She has taught several courses in child development at universities in Jamaica, Canada, and Germany. At the University of Constance, where I was lucky to have one of her classes, Dr. Burke developed and supervised the psychology department's first service learning program for their undergrad students. So today, Dr. Burke will talk about family and academia and whether it's possible to have it all. Enjoy, and don't forget to ask questions on Slido. We'll have a parallel Q&A session later on. All right, heading over to you.
Thank you, Inara. And thank you so much for inviting me to do this talk with your audience today. And good morning to all of you who are listening to my presentation. Today, I'm going to be talking about the family and academia. Specifically for us women, I'm going to be talking about the challenges that we face and how we can try to be as successful as possible, considering that we're wearing two major hats, being a scientist and also being a mom, and that could also include being a wife or a partner. So let's begin. So how many of you can think back of being that little girl who wants to be the scientist, whether it's in the natural sciences or the social sciences? We want to be the scientist, we want to be the professor, but we also want to be mothers, we want to have our partner, the two children, the stereotypical, let's go stereotypical American system of, you have your partner, your two children, your house with a picket fence and a dog. We want all of that, including being scientists. And so many of us may have thought, yeah, I can have it all and all will be well. However, as many of us climb the academic ladder, we might begin to realize that this process of becoming scientists and also mothers, but specifically scientists, can be a very prolonged period of precariousness and uncertainty, especially if you are listening and you're in the postdoc phase. You know how uncertain this period can be, with having to do short research for maybe 2 years at one university or research institute, and then having to move to somewhere else once you get funding or accepted as part of a research team. So the academic going through the academic process, particularly in postdoc, can lead to a high level of uncertainty. And this also coincides with the time that we have the desire to become mothers. So that's for many of us, that's in our 30s, so mid to late 30s, as we're just starting the process, we want to become mothers. Now, the data, unfortunately, is not as promising as we would want as it relates to being the scientist, being the mom, and the spouse at the same time. Approximately 40% of women in science actually leave or go part-time after they have their first child. This compared to 23% of their male counterparts. This is because mothers or female scientists, we tend to be the primary caregivers of our children while running the household. And we realize that having this dual hat can be quite problematic. So many of us go part-time or we leave the academy altogether. So what happens is that academic mothers really suffer the penalty of motherhood when we're trying to go through this process. But we will talk about how we can better equip ourselves to be as successful as possible. So even though we're going through this penalty, we have to realize and be aware of what makes a successful scientist. And unfortunately, motherhood is not as compatible with some of these areas that help us to be successful as scientists. So for example, The number and the quality of publications is very important in being a successful scientist. Unfortunately, the data shows, especially with a lot of research in the US, shows that women actually publish less than men, and they are less likely to publish in international journals and also be senior authors. So we tend to be at the lower ranks as it relates to publications. So in order to be successful, we need the number of publications in high quality journals as well. Other thing that we need is the ability to obtain funding for our research. So you might have a research group. If you're not welcome to a research team, you have to create your own research group and so on. Even when you become a professor, you still have to continue that process. The process of writing grant applications can be quite tedious for us. And again, the responsibility of doing that with motherhood can be too much for us to bear. And then teaching ability. This one is not so much out of sync as it relates to becoming scientists and motherhood. The first two are highly critical based on the university. So you have a lot of universities that are research based and they focus on the first two. And the work that is required to do the first two can be quite strenuous. For universities or colleges that teaching is the primary focus, we can have mothers really maximizing their strength in that area. So I want us to look at the effects of motherhood on the whole academic journey as it relates to productivity and so on. All right, so what does the literature show? More women do enter academia, but we tend to be on the lower ranks, unfortunately, compared to male counterparts. Very few of us go to full professorship. So if you are in Germany, you would have to go through the habilitation process to start, the journey to full professorship. If you're from North America, you're going through first becoming an assistant professor, an associate professor, and then a full professor. You do have a lot of women in the American system that are at the assistant level, but then you have less at the associate and even less at the full professor level. So family constraints, having to take care of young children, sometimes we're also the ones taking care of elderly parents, all of those responsibilities outside of the research setting affects our level of productivity. And as I mentioned, less women with children enter full professorship compared to their male counterparts. And that is evident, as I mentioned, 40% of women who have children end up leaving or going part-time compared to only 23% of their male counterparts. So you can see that at the top level, we are not as strong there, okay? And when you compare ourselves, so it's one thing to be a woman, but then when you add motherhood to it, we're 22% less likely to have tenureship or full professorship compared to mothers who decide, compared to women, who decide not to be mothers. So you can see we have a double whammy. Women are less likely to reach the top, but if you do have children, it's even more of a challenge to get to full professorship. But we're going to talk about how we can be more prepared so that we can get to the top compared to childless women and our male counterparts. So it's not all gloom and doom. There are some advantages to the academic life, especially if you're a mother, the flexibility with the schedule. So mothers, we are able to, if we are really disciplined, we can schedule our research and our projects around our children's holiday period. Compared to if you're working in corporate life, it might be a little bit more rigid because you have to then compete with others to get time off and so on. But in the academic life, holidays, you can definitely work around with your children. You can create your own schedules if you have your own research group or you're part of a research group. You have a lot of research groups are not as rigid to say you need to do the 9 to 5 kind of thing, but they focus mostly on the results. So you can create your own schedule to make sure you can produce the results the research team requires. You can set your own goals. As it relates to what you want to research. So if you're going for funding, you create your own research projects that are in line with your goals, okay? And for me, I think an important thing is that we can get to mentor other women who are younger than us, who are coming up. So it's not just about me. I have the flexibility, I have the work schedule, and I can create any project I want. But in the science field, there is so much opportunity for us to mentor younger researchers who are coming up behind us, who also want to maintain being a scientist and also maintain a family. So we have the opportunity there to really be role models to our peers. So even though there are advantages, there are challenges to motherhood and being in academia. So these challenges are also even more severe for single parent families. So conference travels. Yes, there are there are many universities who provide compensation to travel for conferences. Some, unfortunately, are not covered 100%. So you still have to figure that out. And if you have really young children, children can be quite expensive. So you're thinking about the cost of travel, then to cover, child costs and all of that, childcare costs as well. So when I started my profession in research, I was a single parent at the time, and the travel costs really hit me hard, but also the childcare costs, because you can't necessarily carry children to conferences with you. They're not the most appropriate. So you then have to plan, how are we going to do babysitting? If you have a spouse or a partner, perfect. If you live close to extended family members, that's also perfect. However, there are lots of us who are single parents and we are away from family, and then we don't have that kind of support. So we have to factor that in. The need to apply for research grants as well can be highly stressful. So if you are going through a 1-year project, 2-year project, the emotional anxiety, and the emotional stress that you feel having to apply for grants over and over to maintain your research status can be overwhelming for you, on top of your responsibility of being a mother. So the publish or perish is also something that is anxiety induced. You need to publish in high quality journals, international journals preferably. And those, to write a really good research paper takes a lot of work and a lot of time. And when you have young children, it's difficult for you to find the time at home sometimes that's necessary for you to do that kind of work. And a big thing is geographic mobility. So a lot of us, when we have children, we kind of pull back from the research aspect of things, because sometimes a research job is in another city or even another state or another country. When you have young children, you have to factor in moving the entire family. It's a little bit easier when you have young children because they adjust fast to their environment. But when you have older children, for example, starting at age 10, their social life becomes very important to them. And they then become more resentful or angry with the constant move of the family for research opportunities. So you have to factor in all of that as a mother when you decide to go down this academic route. So in addition to all the challenges, we are now faced with coronavirus. Okay. The pandemic basically has upended all aspects of research. We're now working remotely from home, and teaching has changed. Access to research resources has changed as well. And we as mothers are now having to homeschool. So research that looked at the US, the UK, and Germany have found that female scientists are now more likely to be the ones to homeschool the children, even if they have a partner. When you look at even the publications that are coming out, you have a drop in females publications coming out, the female-led publications coming out. And even as it relates to the whole coronavirus expertise, you have less women contributing. Why is that? It's because we have the children to take care of and the responsibility and it's very hard. Those of us who are currently doing it, it's very hard to move from a mindset of, okay, let me homeschool the children, then I need to sit down and focus on writing. Writing tends to be a very isolating activity. And when we have a ton load of people around, it becomes even more difficult for us to get in the mind frame of writing. So there are lots of that's coming up because of the pandemic around the world. So quite a few publications have been looking at the impact that is hurting women in general, but it's also hurting female scientists as well. We're not getting the opportunity to be as productive as our male counterparts. So now they're saying that there's talk about the fact that what we need is some consideration. So if publication is part of your advancement through the academic ladder, some consideration should be given to women who are actually taking care of family members at the moment. That the rigid assessments need to be modified because of the current circumstances that we now face. So the question, can we have it all even during a pandemic? Can we still maintain the scientific aspect of ourselves while maintaining motherhood and so on? The answer to that is, to some extent, yes. And I will go through why it's possible to still be a scientist and to still maintain the motherhood. So for me, I am on a wide spectrum. I have a 14-year-old and I now have a 15-week-old baby as well. So I am also in the process of how do I juggle everything with having a teenager and also a newborn. So we'll look at how can we still find some sort of balance as best as possible. So how can we have it all? What I want persons who are mothers in the audience listening is that, remember, one size doesn't fit all. What might work for your colleague might not work for you. There are some colleagues who might have extended family around who can chip in. There's some colleagues who might have a partner who can chip in. If you're comparing yourself as it relates to your ability to work and be productive with your other colleagues who also have children, be mindful that their experience might be quite different from yours, and not to be too hard on yourself or not to compare yourself. For those of us who are not mothers yet and want to be mothers, what I have to say is there isn't really a fixed time of when it is to have a child or when not to have a child. There are persons who have said what worked for them was to have their child in graduate school. So by the time they get through the process of going through habilitation or assistantship, associateship to professorship, the children are old enough. There are other women who they waited until they got full professorship before they had family. It all depends on your context and your experience and your support system that you have around. So think about carefully, if you don't have children yet, what might work best for you. All right, for me, you can have it all. However, for many of us, not at the same time. You might want to, you can still maintain your research, but you might want to reduce it a bit to take care of your children when they're very young. And then as they get older, you increase your responsibility. So for me, I have as I mentioned, I have a 14-year-old. I pulled back a couple of years because at the time when I started my research journey, I was also a single parent. And I realized that my son needed my emotional support more than anything. And I thought, being a mother, being a parent, I only get one time to do that job. Once they're 18, that's it. I would have many years left to be a researcher. So what I've done is pull back a bit on the research so I can spend more time at home. Fortunately, I'm now married, and I do have a very supportive spouse. So getting back into it will also be a lot easier for me. So for some of us, if we do have the financial wherewithal to get the additional help, that's great. If we do have family around, that's great. If we don't have any of those, we then will have to choose what is more important to me in this moment to make the shift. Okay, so as it relates to how can I be successful being a mother and being a scientist, what are some of the factors? You need to have a supportive partner or home environment. If you're a single parent, you might need to have a single parent support group. You might need some form of support. The support from your department. So as you go through your research journey, one of the things that becomes very critical is be careful the institution or the department that you choose. Yes, some of them might be very fancy on paper, amazing publications, but they may not be as supportive and understanding of the responsibilities of motherhood. So make sure that whatever institution you choose, that they are really enthusiastic about supporting mothers as best as possible. All right, and then make sure you look at your own flexibility. So how flexible are you to move through the different research projects, go on conferences and that kind of thing. Find other mothers who are full professors and ask them how did they go through the process. Because it can be lonely if you are the only one in your research group with a child, right? Find a network of mothers who can say, this is how we made it. These are some of the things you could possibly consider on your journey to full professorship or, to head a research group. And also, if you feel that you are a good researcher, despite the limitations, you will still have that resilience to go on. So how do you feel about your research skills? Do you think you're a good scientist? Even when everything else is not working around you, you will still want to hold on to that because you think you have the ability and you have a lot to share with the world as it relates to your research ideas. So some other more practical tips. Set realistic goals and be organized. So in my country, there's this saying that if you want something to be done, give it to a mother. The reason being, we tend to have very limited time, so we tend to be more structured. If you want to be a successful scientist and maintain your household, having a schedule will be critical. For me, I put everything in my calendar, even my self-care time, even my meditative time, all of that. You have to be very, very structured and manage your time well because you have limited time. You don't have, your child can be sick at any moment, right? You don't have that kind of flexibility compared to someone who doesn't have children. Write every day. So one of the things that you can do is maybe you wake up an hour and a half or so before other family members, and especially your children, and even write for 15 minutes a day. You're talking about compound effect now. So if you write minimum 15 minutes a day, you'll be quite surprised how much you get done in a week, especially a month or even a couple of months. Okay, understand your university's priorities and your own. So think about it, the university or the research institute that you're at, do they focus on research? If they focus on research You need to then look at your own priorities. Can you meet the university standard? If it's more of a teaching institute, you might realize you don't have to focus so much on your scientific work compared to your teaching work. So it's very important to understand what's going on in the university. If you're in a research group or if you have research assistants, this is a good time to delegate responsibilities to them so you don't feel overwhelmed. And surround yourself with successful mothers. Again, mentorship. You need to see how it's possible by looking at people or speaking to people who have done it before. You don't need to be reinventing the wheel and trying to figure out how you're going to make it work. Very important, mothers, learn to say no. As women in general, we tend to find it difficult to not say no to certain projects, be invited to certain committees and all of that. It's important for us to learn. This is where your priorities come into play. If something is not a part of your priority, you can say, thank you for the invitation. However, I cannot participate in this right now because I have other things going on and so on. It's important for you to maintain your boundaries, because if you have leaky boundaries and you're saying yes to everything, what's going to happen is that you're going to experience burnout. Your quality of output regarding your scientific work will not be great, and then your family life would also not be great. Okay? And have strict separation between work and home where possible. So you don't want to be writing, try to take, for example, Sundays off, Saturday off, and focus only on family. Your family need to make sure that they are important to you, even though you're on your scientific journey. So you can take the Sunday off, and it's just family. You're not accepting email, you're not reading emails, you're not writing your thing, you're not doing research, you're only focusing on family. Again, it's important to maintain that balance. All right, another thing I wanted to talk about is divesting from the academy. So yes, you might want to still, be a scientist, but you can maintain that in addition to doing something outside the academy. So for me, because I needed to spend more time with my son, what I've done is taken my scientific skill and started a company where I provide parent coaching. So because my research focuses so much on parent-child relationships, what I've done is I've conducted parenting classes. I've done parent coaching for those who are struggling, particularly those adjusting to immigration, parents who are having challenges with children becoming teenagers and realizing their parenting skills are just not working, parenting tools are just not working anymore. So I've taken my scientific skill set and implemented them into a business. Yes, I'm still working on my research, but that now has just been at a limited capacity, and I've moved over to having a business that is maximizing my research skills so that I can still take care of my family. So you don't have to get out of the academy altogether. You can still do research at a limited capacity, and you can take your skill sets and create another business venture for yourself. And if you're not sure how to do that, you can get a business coach. So for example, for me, in order to maximize on my academic skills and my research skills, I employed a business coach for 6 months to help me to know how I can translate all that academic knowledge into practical aspects that my clients would be satisfied with. All right, so that's my talk on whether or not we can have it all. For me, at the end of it, we can, but for most of us, is that we might not be able to have it all at the same time, at the same level, at the same time. Sometimes you might focus on your research more, and then when you have young children that need you, you might need to take more time with family while keeping the research at a minimum. So thank you so much for your attention. I think we're now going to go to the question and answer, and I will over to that side to answer any questions that you may have.